Turn it over to Will. Will introduces people. He introduces you, and we're off and running.
And have we got me set up to share the screen?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, you're totally clear to share the screen.
Okay.
If you want to try it once, just to click it on. We're in a setup right now. None of this, I am recording, but none of it goes on the video.
Sure.
From the time I open it, that's when it goes on the video.
Okay. Okay.
And you don't need to ask permission, just go straight to a
Yeah,
share.
let's just make sure it works.
There you go.
There we go. All right.
Wow.
Good. All right.
Impressive.
You like the image?
All right. So I can't tell whether it's still loading up, whether people are still filing in. They are coming in, but they're sort of dribbling in right now. All right. What's your call, Will? You think we ought to open it? Give it another minute?
Yeah, Happy New Year, everybody coming in. Yeah, sure. Whenever.
All right. I'll tell you what. Everybody mute. Okay, Corinne. There we go. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dana White, and welcome to the Myth Salon. As if we didn't have enough to deal with in terms of the pandemic, I'm hard pressed to feel that none of us is not deeply troubled by the protests and the storming of the Capitol yesterday by the Trump people. I was going to read Yeats' Second Coming as a poem today. But after we get in, I thought better of it. I'm going to read something that I think is gentler, a little more appropriate by Maya Angelou. And all this is taking place with us rapidly moving towards 400,000 deaths in America through the coronavirus. Right now, we're 370 plus. It's just hard to believe how many friends and neighbors and relatives have fallen victim to this. And I think the general sense is that the vaccines are on the way, if slowly, but I think it'll be several months before we really know the degree to which we're gaining traction on this. So I would like to open the Myth Salon with a moment of silence for anyone you can think of who is troubled, who's caught the coronavirus, who's been involved in the melee in Washington. We need some love, peace, some tranquility. We need a moment of reflection. So let's see if we can bring it in tonight. So. Thank you all for being here. I have received any number of just the most wonderful comments from people who have shared the degree to which the community that is the Myth Salon has become part of their worlds. And we're fortunate to have one another, and we're fortunate that the love that we profess and talk and share, it really comes through this community. And I'm deeply grateful for, for my small role in this, because without all of you, without all of us, this just would be a dream. It wouldn't be a reality. So on that note, this is called The Human Family by Maya Angelou. I note the obvious differences in the human family. Some of us are serious. Some thrive on comedy. Some declare their lives are lived as true profundity, and others claim they really live the real reality. The variety of our skin tones can confuse, bemuse, delight. Brown and pink and beige and purple, tan and blue and white. I've sailed upon the 7 seas and stopped in every land. I've seen the wonders of the world. Not yet one common man. I note the obvious differences between each sort and each type. But we are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. We are more alike, my friends, than we are unalike. I do think Second Coming would have had a moment today, but there's some anger in Second Coming, and I'm looking for some restoration and healing. So I'd like now to turn it over to my very good friend and colleague, Will Lynn, and we'll go around and introduce one another. Welcome, Gary, to the Myth Salon tonight. Above you, at least on my screen, we have Selena, who's a fellow Canadian. Thank you all for being here tonight, and welcome. Will?
Thank you, Dana. Yeah, my mind goes back to the night of the last presidential debate, and it was the night that we were doing that event with Chris Vogler, and it was just so exciting to see that so many people came to our event that was scheduled right at the exact same time as the debate, and I think that speaks to the fact that this is a different universe that we're in here together, engaging myth, engaging the depths. And while we're very concerned with what's going on in the world, and that's always been a conversation that we're participating in, it's nice to be here together, regardless of whatever may be going on out there. And it's nice to be in this new year. And I know we all have varied hopes for what it will bring. One thing that I know many of you have seen is an announcement for the next set of Myth Salons, which we're very excited about. So if you haven't seen those, hopefully you'll check those out. Tonight's going to be a very cool conversation. I'll introduce the panelists now and then introduce a little bit about the topic. You all know Dr. Dana White, who's, by the way, hopefully you're checking out his Tao Te Ching projects, which are fantastic. I'm sure we'll get a link in the chat here, but you all know Dr. Dana White, who's a scholar, author, and host of this Myth Salon and adjunct faculty member at Pacifica Graduate Institute. I'm Will Lynn. I lightly moderate these Myth Salons. I've spent years working for the Joseph Campbell Foundation and building an academic department for filmmakers and performing artists. It was now called Huston College, and hopefully you're checking out mythhouse.org now. We're also joined by Dr. Dennis Slattery, a mythology scholar, poet, longtime professor in Pacifica's Myth Program, and author of An Obscure Order, Reflections on Cultural Mythologies. Selena Matthews is a clinical psychologist, author, keynote speaker who graduated from Pacifica and has been an ever-present participant and supporter of the Myth Salon. Zaman, who's a professor of mythology and political science at Pacifica and Cal State, a poet, linguist, mystic, and Fulbright scholar. And we're joined by Dr. Boris Nunley, a professor at the University of California, Riverside, who teaches rhetoric, philosophy, and literature. He's interested in issues of heretical energy, the dark feminine, gendered and racialized knowledge, and the demise of vulnerability. And Corinne Bordeaux, founder of 360 Degree Communications, a leading boutique entertainment firm dedicated to social change films and co-director of the SALON Film Festival, a good friend of the Myth Salon. And I'd also like to welcome and thank Connie Zweig, who helps us invite such amazing guests. Connie is an internationally renowned psychologist for her work on shadow, whose books include Meeting the Shadow and Romancing the Shadow. Lastly, it is my honor and privilege to welcome Gary Bobroff, who is the founder of Jungian Online, which connects clients with Jungian analysts via live video since 2011. And he's the developer and facilitator of Archetypal Nature, a Jungian personality system rooted in the work of Tony Wolff. He's the author of Knowledge in a Nutshell, Carl Jung, 2020, and Crop Circles, Jung and the Reemergence of the Archetypal Feminine. And he has a BA from the University of British Columbia, Canada, and an MA in psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute. And that brings us to his talk for tonight, which is really an excellent example of original work that I think we're all very happy to see coming out of Pacifica. This is the kind of stuff, new connections between, in this case, the archetypal patterns of Tony Wolff and the 5 Buddha families. So in this presentation for the Myth Salon, Gary's going to illustrate this overlap between Tony Wolff's structural forms of the psyche and Chogyam's Trungpa's 5 Buddha families personality system. So this coordination of these models will demonstrate the reality of the collective unconscious and reinforce the value of this approach to understanding personality. And this will all come to us from a very familiar, comfortable Jungian background. So again, I'm going to present the basic archetypes of the model and their parallel Buddha family. And for over 25 years, he has been a student and teacher of archetypal personality systems that have been drawn from Tony Wolff's work. So we're really in luck tonight to look at a fresh angle on archetype that is both depth psychological, literary, and also brings in world religions. So thank you, Gary, for being with us. Really looking forward to this evening.
Well, thank you so much. That was such a great introduction. Well, thank you. Really appreciate your emphasis that this is something new and new from the old tradition, which I think is really important. And, for me, I think a lot of us, we're bringing maybe some anxiety in the room, or there is some anxiety present in the field today for sure. And, I don't know if you have to take your shoes off and get your feet on the ground and kind of get your energy down in the ground, or whatever it is that we all need to do in this moment to be present. But I think one of the things that we can think about in this community is that we are connected to something that is much more extended in time than this moment. That the teachers that we're learning from, are connected to previous traditions, philosophical traditions, religious traditions, hermetic traditions that go back, to the real roots of our knowledge. So thank you for that. That was beautiful. And I also want to say, it's such a tragic time, and a particularly tragic couple of days. And I had a teacher about 20 years ago taught me the difference between tragedy and comedy, and maybe he knows where I'm going with this. But Dennis, when I had a class with him quite a long time ago now, Dennis Slattery, our panelist here, talks about the difference between tragedy and comedy being time. And so, we're right at about send in the clowns moment, but maybe we need 2 more weeks and then we can send in the clowns and maybe start to take some of the edge off of the anxiety and the difficulty of our time. All right, so are we ready? All right, so I'm going to take you on a tour through some material that I've been around a long time and developed a long time, and I've put a lot of thought into how I present, so I hope you'll enjoy it. Okay, all right, so just going to fix one thing. All right. So the site for the work is Archetypal Nature. I'm probably going to rebrand that pretty soon, but for now, if you're interested in it, you can check out archetypalnature.com. Thank you guys for having me. Pleasure to be in such a thoughtful community today. Okay. Oh, all right. I gotta go this way. Sorry, guys. There we go. Okay. All right, here we go. So you heard my bio from Will there. So I am also a certified administrator of the MBTI, and I do work as a political consultant a little bit, which is really fun, as you'll see from this material. There's the book that just came out in May, which is actually selling really well, which is pretty amazing. So it's part of the series, Knowledge in a Nutshell series. So as Will said, I have 25 years of looking at the world through MBTI, 35 looking at the world through MBTI, and 25 looking through Wolf and that lineage of the archetypal system I'm going to show you today. But I'm not an expert on Buddhist psychology, so that's not going to be something I tell you too much about today. And I am doing a seminar on this coming up, starting in about 10 days. So these are models of personality from the collective unconscious. We have Tony Wolff in the early 20th century in Switzerland and the Tibetan tradition, and both of them have given us models of personality that are very, very similar. And the 5 Buddha families tradition that I'm going to tell you about goes back at least 1,000 years and is cross-national. So you see a little bit of it in Tibet and India and Japan and China. But the primary teacher that brought it to the West, Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who is, of course, the founder of Naropa, and a sort of crazy wisdom, controversial figure in his own right, but certainly delivered this amongst other things to our knowledge. That was passed on from him to Irene, and she's written a couple books, Irene Rockwell, on this material. Also, you'll see tonight some quotes from Waylon Lewis, who's the founder of Elephant Journal, who's very into the 5 Buddha families as well. And their work really helped me see the connection to Tony Wolff's work, which I was already super familiar with, obviously. So Tony died in 1953, born in 1888. As you guys know, very close companion of Jung. You can see that in the new Black books in great detail. And there's a picture of the whole crew. Jung, Emma, Tony. You guys might have heard this here, but doesn't Sigmund Freud look suspiciously tall in this picture? Oh, that's because he's standing on a box and Jung is hunched over to further the impression. So, okay. All right. So during Jung's Red Book period, when he's doing that confrontation with the unconscious, it's Tony that's right in there with him, and kind of both his psychic lifeguard and kind of suffering through it herself as well. And Miss Yaffe said that she was Jung's helper in the intellectual penetration of the world of psychic images. When I look at Tony, and a lot of my work, actually, both my first book and this work is a sort of a continuation of Tony, and I didn't really plan that. But, when I look at her, I just see, such depth in those eyes. And I think many of you probably feel the same way. She was the first president of the Zurich Psychological Club, a kind of a precursor to the institutes, as you guys know. And when Psychological Types was being written, from people I've talked to, they talk about Tony being involved in that process and perhaps being the reason that we have the intuitive category in the MBTI and in Psychological Types. And Tony felt something was missing from Psychological Types, and that's why she gave us this archetype system. She called it the structural forms of the feminine psyche when she lectured on it in 1934. And I love that term, structural form. I think that gives a good description of what we're talking about here. A very different idea from many other archetype systems that are out there today, talking about something that is the basis and the ground and primary in psychology, it's fundamental in who we are. And she developed this from character types in European literature and other similar systems that were in development, but she's brought it together in a new way. And Wolff's archetypes became part of the lexicon from that point into the 70s and 80s and 90s. And you can find chapters on it in books by Ulanov and Whitmont and Irene Claremont de Castillo and many, many others. Jungian authors, especially 70s, 80s, 90s, more really 70s was the first part. My connection to it, my teachers were taught directly by Tad and Noreen Guzzi, who were an American-Canadian couple. And they came to this the same way Tony did. They started as MBTI practitioners, felt something was missing, found Tony's work, and then wrote their own book about it, called About Men and Women, and it is back now in print. And I am writing my own book on this as well. So we get into this stuff. I mean, I think anytime you're talking about something this deep in the collective unconscious that has to do with character, it is triggering. And so I think I want to be very careful with my caveats and definitions here about what I'm talking about and what I'm not talking about. First of all, no word could ever sum up an archetype. A word is like a little bottle cap on the big giant bottle that is an archetype. But there can be a coherent whole there nonetheless that you're trying to use a word to point to. Of course, we could talk about that a lot more, but no, there's no perfect words here. So if you're looking for a perfect word to define an archetype, it's not going to happen. When I talk about an archetype, I'm talking about something that's universal, transcending time and culture. It's a kind of a psychological gravity. Our relationship to an archetype pulls our response in distinct direction towards it or repelled by it. This is how we get our character, by how we feel about the world and what's in it. And archetype is like a raging river of energy in us. It's the way libido flows through us. And Jung talked about archetypes as why we build our nest the way we do. And specifically when we get into the particulars of tonight, there's a way that I'm using the term archetype that is more specific from the generalized Jungian usage, in which there's thousands of archetypes. Here, archetype would really be better served by the term structural forms, but people aren't going to know what I mean when I say that. So there's a more specific meaning here with the word archetype tonight rather than the general Jungian usage. And I love Terence McKenna's description of Jung. He said he provided maps of the unconscious. He was a noetic archaeologist. And that's very much how I feel about Jung as well. He was looking at what is in the psyche, blowing off the dust, and trying to see what is actually there. Okay. So my goal tonight is to talk about personality types or personality forms, character structures, not enlightenment. So I'm not going that path here tonight. And that's not particularly my interest in general. So the caveats, so we're going to talk about archetypes here. For example, we're going to talk about mother, father. And for me, that is one archetype, not two. One in the terms, the boundaries of what I'm describing tonight, it's a single archetype, and you'll see why. So we're not talking about, we're not saying anything about how anybody should be. There's no bests. There's no right archetype to be. None of these are better than any other. Each have negative, positive, and shadow and mature forms. And each has an important perspective to bring. So this is different from a lot of archetype systems you may have, may be familiar with or may have heard of. And I would really encourage you to have a paper and pen and be ready to make notes and watch your own process here, because the images, the feelings, the responses that come up in you, I would say are real gold for you to work on. And the first time you're exposed to new material, sparks fly in a way they won't other times. So I'd really encourage you to have something ready and be ready to sit with what comes up for you. That's much more important than what I'm delivering. How it hits you is really the magic and the gold here. Okay, so you guys need a breath? Get ready.
This is so awesome. Thank you. Really looking forward.
Thank you, Will. All right, I'm going to take a drink. Okay. All right. So I'm going to take you into the models now. So this is the model that Tony gave us. And as you see at the north there, the top of the circle, you have mother. At the bottom, you have what she called hetera, or it's Greek word for companion. We'll talk about what that means as we go forward. On the left there, you have Amazon, and on the right, you have mediatrix. And I'll talk about that more. But the term mediatrix refers to the medial person who, in her case, the medial woman, who knows through the unconscious, who knows through the, we would say in the Jungian use of the term irrational, through an irrational function. She gets information without knowing why. And I'm very glad to be part of a tradition that celebrates the medial woman and bringing her back into a medial person, because it certainly is available to all genders. Because this has been something that's been burnt out of Western culture and yet is a part of the human nature, part of who we are. So I'm very glad to be celebrating its return and celebrating people who find identity and fulfillment through that archetype. So my teachers, the Guzzies, took the system and developed it in their own way for men and women, and used the term mother, father for the top there, seeker and companion for the bottom, Amazon and warrior on the left, and sage and mediatrix on the right, sage referring to the knowing person. The Buddha families that I'm going to show you the connection to, we have Ratna, Padma, Karma, and Vajra. And when you bring them all together, as I'm going to do tonight, that is what it looks like. And I'll show you this as we go, but just to introduce you to the map and the model here. Okay, so I'm going to start with what we call the impersonal axis. Both the warrior Amazon and the sage mediatrix are impersonal archetypes. They're not focused on people. They're focused on the world, understanding the world, or doing in the world, as we shall see. Okay, the symbol for the Karma Buddha family is the sword. The Karma Buddha family is about action. Performance is primary for these folks. The warrior Amazon find their identity and fulfillment in accomplishing in the outer world. He's a go-getter who sets goals for himself and gets things done. His energy is directed toward accomplishing the task, winning the game, executing the plan, conquering the territory, seizing the prize. That's from Guzzi and Guzzi. This is from Irene Rockwell. Karma people are highly functional, practical, efficient, and effective. They act in timely and appropriate ways in flow with the world. They like things to have purpose, function well, and get results. They love challenge, adventure, and risk-taking. Waylon Lewis says this is the most efficient and active family. Karma literally means action or activity. Karma people like things to work, to be functional and timely. They're pragmatic with a tendency toward competition. Tony describes the Amazon. The Amazon structural form emphasizes the individual's own personality and its development within the framework of the objective cultural values of our day. A development that occurs quite independent of other people and of instinctive psychic factors. She's independent of the male because her development is not based on psychological relationship with him. The conscious values he represents are hers too. Her interest is directed towards an object of achievement, which she wants to accomplish by herself. That's Annie Oakley there. Barbara Koltov says, for this type of woman, doing predominates. Irene Rockwell says the karma environment is characterized by dynamic activity. Since karma people don't use a lot of forethought, their actions are based on trial and error. Thinking is utilitarian, rather than visionary. And that's a little taste of the shadow. I'm going to give you hardly any shadow here today, just a little taste. So performance is primary for these folks, right? So there's the best branding ever. Exactly, correctly, the right brand to appeal to warriors. Warriors and Amazons are defined by assertion, the instinct for claiming our identity and place in the world through the effective use of external means.
Say, Mrs. Burnham, when you first came here, I thought you would be hopeless. But you're a natural.
Well, all I know is I love shooting this gun.
American Beauty there. So one of the things that I want to emphasize here is that these are not fanciful archetypes. These are not idealized archetypes. And if you look at a lot of descriptions of archetypal systems, a lot of them are very idealized. And when I'm talking about the warrior, I'm talking about the warrior we see in the world every day, day to day in history. So go to a construction site and you're hanging out with a whole lot of warriors. You know, it's an aggressive environment. Go in a locker room, men are ripping on each other, tearing each other down. That is the coin of the realm. This is how they are. This is not idealized spiritual warrior, which means something completely different. This is the world as it is, you know, realpolitik, not the world we imagine to be true. And warriors tend to be, and Amazons tend to be energized by competition. They want to win. They want to be the best. They like the idea of a world of competition. Warriors and Amazons tend to be independent and determined. They're self-sufficient and they expect you to be as well. Irene Rockwell says they're confident in their abilities, efficient, effective, appropriate action, and use skillful means. So the summary bullet points there, you know, doing oriented, they get their identity from prowess, from capability, from power. They like to overcome challenges in the world, and they're goal oriented. Being the best matters to them. There's some shadow there for you as well. Overly aggressive. Might makes right. You know, for a long time, you got to remember there's a tradition in human culture that morality was associated with victory on the battlefield. Who's telling the truth? The knight that wins in battle. He's the truthful one. That determines moral rightness. So moral rightness, righteousness and correctness were attached to victory on the battlefield. And I'm not saying that's good. I'm saying that is what is. And this is a certain way of being that is simply true in the world. This is a certain kind of people. And of course, there's all kinds of different gradations and variations and combinations of this, but okay. Trungpa says karma is associated with aggression. This is one of the fuels of life, fuels of human society and culture. This is from Glengarry Glen Ross.
Because we're adding a little something to this month's sales contest. As you all know, first prize is a Cadillac Eldorado. Anybody want to see second prize? Second prize is a set of steak knives. Third prize is you're fired. You get the picture? You laughing now?
Okay. I have to always wonder when I hear that. I wonder where he gets that accent from. You follow me? Yeah, that's clear warrior. Don't care about your feelings. Don't care about community. Don't care about truth or love. Care about who sells the most. And if you don't cut it, adios. That's warrior. And this is the second last slide for this archetype. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly because, you know, it's a short time zone here, but there's a magic and a unique magic to each one of these archetypes. And, you know, there is a lot of positivity in my friends that are warriors, that fighting spirit. And I want to give you a little taste of that inborn warrior. And I believe this, people come out of the chute this way. They're born this way. They're not made this way. And here's an example of that.
I like my haircuts. I like my pajamas. I like my stuff. I like my rooms. I like my whole house. My whole house is great. I can do anything good. Yeah. I can do anything good. Better than anyone. Better than everyone.
It's the better than anyone part that really sells me on the Amazon there from Jessica's Daily Affirmations. All righty, let's go to the other end of the chart here. Sage and Mediatrix. These folks get their identity and fulfillment through awareness, through solving the puzzle, figuring it out, coming up with the right answer, being correct, being accurate. Irene Rockwell says they radiate a sense of I know. So in the tradition of the Mediatrix, of course, we have the Oracle of Delphi. And of course, she knows through a non-causal, non-rational way, yet nonetheless she knows. This is a part of human experience. Trungpa says a person in the Vajra family knows how to evaluate logically the arguments that are used to explain experience. He can tell whether the logic is true or false. The intellect of the Vajra family is not just encyclopedic, it is sharpness, directness, and awareness of perspectives. Of course, that's what we're doing today, looking at other kinds of perspectives. Guzzi and Guzzi say, Sage's inner drive to put himself and others in touch with reason, mind, thought, and spirit. His best contact with others takes place through the sharing of ideas and theories and visions, found not only in the professions of teaching and scholarship. He might be a cabinet maker, a mechanic, or a gardener, a cracker barrel philosopher. If your mechanic explains to you how he had to get in there and drill a little hole and do this special thing to fix you, you can think of the archetypal sage there. So these folks tend to be reflective as opposed to doing oriented. They understand themselves through their ability to problem solve and to be knowledgeable. And these folks safeguard what we know, what we understand, what we believe. And there certainly can be shadow here. Very often, we imagine sage folks can be missing the body, for example. So Rockwell says, Vajras get so caught up in their heads that they neglect their bodies. This is common, right? And we might say, well, some people have a warrior and a sage both, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But each one, and people can be just one predominantly, especially. And so there certainly are lots of, absent-minded professors out there who might be missing their body a little bit. And of course, this archetype, like all of them, has a magic, certainly that curiosity, invention, and seeing ahead, seeing the problem, before it happens. There's a great Einstein quote about, geniuses, solving the problem before it comes along. And this archetype, I'm going to tell you the least about because I want to focus a bit more on the other three. And I think a lot of us here tonight probably relate to this one. So I think it kind of needs the least explanation, but anyway, that's that. So that's all I'm doing for those two. I want to focus more on the other direction here. So there's a tension, and this tension between the performance-oriented folks and the understanding-oriented folks happens every day in our world. If you are in a company and the salesmen, the warriors, are out there selling, and then they bring it back to the R&D folks or the tech folks, and they say, oh, well, I sold this, now you got to build it. There's an inherent tension, whether it's in the corporate world, in our own lives, in ourselves. This is a tension that's very real in the world. Now let's turn our attention the other way. And there's another inherent tension Jung has a great quote. He says, individuality and collectivity are related by guilt. And this is the axis that talks about that guilt, perhaps, that tension between the orientation towards the collective, to the group, and orientation towards the individual. Okay, so Ratna, the top of our chart now. And Ratna in 5 Buddha family means jewel. And jewel association to power. So this is mother, father. Trungpa says, Ratna is a personal and real sense of expanding ourselves and enriching the environment. It is plentifulness. In the positive expression of the Ratna family, the principle of richness is extraordinary. We feel very rich and plentiful, and we extend ourselves to the world. We are extending constantly, like a flood or an earthquake.
75 men have I killed with my own hands in battle. I scatter, I burn my enemies' tents. I take away their flocks and herds. The Turks pay me a golden treasure, yet I am poor, because I am a river to my people.
I once worked with someone, and he used to say his expression, I'm sure many of you have heard, that I'm just a bamboo shoot that the money passes through. All right. So this is part of father, part of king, part of focus on collective wealth. Doing for others. Here we have Chief Avril Looking Horse. Mother, father, archetype, Ratna, Buddha family people tend to be focused on doing for others. Tony writes, she does not condescend, but finds room for development and security. She finds her ego fulfillment in strengthening the object of her attention. And we might immediately, as this image suggests, turn to children. But this energy can very often be expressed in different ways. Could be a business, could be a cause, could be a spouse, could be a religion, or many other possible objects. These folks tend to find their identity through their role in collectives, through their role at work, through their role in a group, through their role in a community, through their role in a family. And because they're so invested in the group, they may be a natural leader, gifted with holding the group. When I was in Berlin doing a workshop on this many years ago, I asked them, what archetype do you think Angela Merkel is? And they said, father. And in a way, Germany kind of is that sort of wise, at this point, a kind of a wise, do-right older sibling, perhaps, or certainly perhaps a mother, father. Okay, so Rockwell says, their sensitivity and sense of inclusion makes them skillful team members or leaders. Their energy, mother, father's energy goes into the collective, into the team. And this is partly why they're such good at leadership. They think about how, if they're a teacher, many teachers are father, mother archetype. And their energy is why, how is that kid in grade 7 fitting in? How is this? You don't have to direct them there. Their energy is going to the group already unconsciously. Great example of what you might call father-warrior combination. Vince Lombardi says, individual commitment to a group effort. That is what makes a teamwork, a company work, a society work, a civilization work. You might think there's some dark side with that too, but this is understanding different ways, different values, different belief systems that live inside us. And I think that mother, father, very often in their writings and their sayings and the slogans you hear from them, they're describing collective-oriented wisdom. Mother, father, Ratna folks find their identity and fulfillment through belonging, through the collective. So a national identity, you see a Scottish person there on the left, through their work role, maybe their union membership. They tend to be oriented towards societal values. What their neighbors think, what their community thinks really matters a lot to these folks. If they lose face publicly, they're going to be upset about it. they tend to be inherently team oriented. They're already oriented towards the team. They already see how important it is to serve the group. And finally, a very big point is that they are invested in what has been achieved. They're invested in what has been built up. So if you're coming along, bringing changes, bringing the new, you are threatening what has been built up. Or I can say it another way here for you.
And how do we keep our balance? That I can tell you in one word. Tradition!
I love that movie. Every time I hear that, tingles all over. So powerful, powerful film. I'm sure many of you feel the same way. So one of the special qualities of Ratna Mother Father folks is some of them are extremely blessed extremely gifted at making us feel like part of a special team. And you'll hear people talk about the king, which is one of the archetypes connected here, as bringing order, generativity, and blessing. Generativity referring to productive construction of systems, productive construction of people, productive orientation of the system. But another piece is blessing, and it's so important. You know, here you see Patrick Stewart getting knighted by Queen Elizabeth. Blessing, saying to other people, we're so lucky to have you here. There's always a place here for you. We have very few opportunities in our culture for this kind of blessing. I think folks that are this archetype really wish there were more opportunities for them to bless. I've had father archetype men my age give me speeches like that, and it is truly wonderful to feel blessed in that way. And there really isn't enough space in our culture for this blessing. And I think we have to look for opportunities for every archetype to bring their gold into our community. So there's the wrap-up chart description for the whole archetype there. Often the dark side of people that are oriented to doing for control. I do for you, but I expect, so each of this is a tricky thing, and there's light and dark, and they're often connected. So finally, note on the gold here from Rockwell, Ratna's wisdom is equanimity, belief that the world is abundant and plentiful. They are hospitable, generous, and give us sustenance like the good earth. They recognize the potential in people and bring out their richness. I think this is a very important and beautiful gift. Okay. And the last thing I'm going to say is that we've certainly seen, definitely, obviously, from the 1950s to now, an increasing dethroning of the father, that the nuclear family has rotated less and less around the male authority figure. I think that this dethroning has what spurred the men's movement and the men's rights movement. And in my experience, the men most likely to be interested in those are father archetype men. And they're it's disorienting. They don't know, they know they're missing something, but they don't know why. And I think it's important to recognize that. It's a tough transition culturally that we're going through right now for the father. Important, certainly, but difficult for some. Okay, so lots we could say on that, but let's go to the other end of the chart. So this is an axis that has to do with people. So mother, father are very oriented towards people, but in the collective sense. Now we go to the other end where people are oriented towards the individual persons.
Of silence.
Hey, what's the matter? Guess we're all downstairs, Ben, waiting to see you.
Dad, could you explain to them that I have to be alone for a while?
These are all our good friends, Ben. Most of them have known you since, well, practically since you were born. What is it, Ben?
I'm just
worried?
Well...
About what?
I guess about my future.
What about it?
I don't know. I want it to be...
To be what?
Different.
He wants it to be different. So this archetype of folks introduces the new. Seekers and companions explore life and discover who they are through relationships. They challenge tradition, encouraging others to explore new and unconventional approaches. And that's from Priestley and Lear, my teachers in this work. So the Buddha family here is Padma, and the archetype is seeker and companion. And of course, this is one of those areas where the words, we can talk about those perhaps in the Q&A a little bit more, but there's no perfect words. So the Padma family described by Rockwell, Padmas have the ability to live outside societal norms because of their naturally unconventional tastes. These folks tend to be one-on-one oriented. They tend to get their identity from intimate relations, from the self, from the new. We'll talk about that more in a second. Individuality and authenticity matter here. And as opposed to mother, father doing for, these folks tend to be defined by doing with. They tend to introduce the new and find their fulfillment in romantic, creative, mystical, or other possibilities. They tend to be egalitarian. They're interested in peer relationships and usually open to any kind of companionship because they discover who they are by relating to different people in a variety of situations. I believe that's Guzzi and Guzzi. So they get their identity through the one-on-one, through the individual. So the romantic energy, that's Amelie there. These folks tend to be very comfortable in spaces of dating, intimacy, sexuality, authenticity, comfortable with those energies. The whole seeker of who am I, tell me who I am, all this energy in pop music and in the culture about, not knowing who we are. This is all seated right here, because if you're outside of the collective, also personal psychological reasons, I think these folks tend to be on that quest. Who am I? What am I about? Because they're not on the collective bandwagon. And this archetype also can be associated with the muse, with leading the partner into opportunities for growth and development. Rockwell says they delight in intimate connections. They're playful, flirtatious, and seductive. So for me, underneath seeker and companion is both the lover and the child. And that's a difference from many archetypal systems, obviously, but particularly from Moore's King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. So that this is both the lover and the child. And, many of you will know in the Jungian world, we connect the child with the new. The child brings the new, for better or worse. And so I think of both seeker and companion, which is one archetype for all genders, constituted by lover and child. Trungpa says the genuine character of Padma seduction is real openness, a willingness to demonstrate what we have and what we are to the phenomenal world. What we bring to the world is a sense of pleasure, a sense of promise. Okay, this is the archetypal lover. The quality of Padma is like bathing in perfume or jasmine tea. Each time we bathe, we feel refreshed, fantastic. We might say even reborn, as we associate with the divine child. So again, we see the overlap between Tony's system and the Buddha family. Tony says the companion's function is to awaken their partner's individual psychic life and to lead them through and beyond their roles and responsibilities into their total personality. Okay. Got a clip here. I'm not going to include it, but if you want to, just for time, I'm just going to leave it behind. But Anais Nin celebrates Lou Andrea Salome, and you see throughout Anais's work all the different qualities of the seeker and companion, the person who will often, even the woman leaving the relationship, she talks about that in that clip, that this is its own archetype. And here you see a good kind of spiritual description of it. She says, each friend represents a world in us, a world not born until they arrive. And it's only by this meeting that a new world is born. And this is an example of individual focused wisdom. Don't want to be your boss. And if you look at, Dylan amongst them, almost every counterculture icon, if you make a chart of all the, countercultural icons in US history, very, very few mother-father types amongst the group. There are probably some, and there certainly are political leaders that are that archetype, but in the icons, the people we use to represent it, we don't see a lot of the opposite. Here's one of those talking about this question.
Possible. There was a conscious attempt at experimentation.
That's right. There's a water tower on the road to Stinson Beach out in California, Marin County, and this water tower has one word on it. It says "seek." And that sums up who we were. That group of people that started that scene in San Francisco. We were the people who were seeking.
So you can think of the 60s and that time in California especially as a sort of archetypal self-naming, self-acceptance, self-recognition, understanding, no, we are different. This is who we are, and we like it that way. And Jung backs the idea up that this is a way of being. He says, in every adult there lurks a child, an eternal child, something that is always becoming, is never completed, and calls for unceasing care, attention, and education. That is the part of the personality that wants to develop and become whole. And I think it's important to understand that this is something that is, an eternal character type, that we have these all through history. This is, it blooms and blossoms in different eras and at different times. Oh yeah, I thought we missed something. This one. Oh. Okay, so Guzzi and Guzzi write, the seeker describes an authentic way of being, just as legitimate as father or warrior. This archetype is not a stage towards something else. And we can talk about Puera-Puella complex, and I can show you Puera-Puella in different places in this chart. So there are some, Jungian voices over time talking about the system that have sort of wanted to equate different things and say, well, this is this and that is that. I can show you a father puer. I can show you the puer in different positions. So we cannot say that this is equivalent with the puer-puella. It may be a relevant complex for a lot of seeker and companion types, but it is not equivalent. And this is a kind of person. That's a German bohemian there from 100 years ago, that this is something eternal in the human character. It might find little pockets where it blossoms more than in other times, but it is not something we grow out of or become something else out of. And we can talk about that more if you'd like in the Q&A. So again, you can see that this points to a real inherent tension in the culture. And again, I'm not telling anybody how they should be. I think all of these have beautiful, valid, good and bad points. But we're not telling anybody how they should be. And you will find other archetypal systems that do that. I think at the core of what we're talking about here is differences in values. So, as opposed to other kinds of systems, I do not believe we're not describing a choose your own adventure here. It's not pick 3 archetypes and that's you. We're saying you're rooted somewhere, whether you like it or not. And it's not a consumerist, I feel like that, no, you are rooted somewhere. And in my experience in this work, some people find their identity right away, and some people have resistance. The words mother, father, especially, are very loaded, especially in the personal growth world, seen very negatively, generally. People are loath to identify with them in the personal growth world. And I also don't have agendas. We'll talk about maturity and development here, but I don't have agendas about being all of these, that we have to be all these. And you'll hear, for example, Robert L. Moore talk about, well, you have to be all these to be a mature man. I think that's complete nonsense. And usually people are, lying to themselves. I think if you think you're all 4, you're probably, full of crap. Generally, maybe, there are some maybe that are, but generally there's a lot of people that are pretending that they are because it feels good. The 5 Buddha families, Trungpa says, are quite ordinary. There's nothing divine or extraordinary about them. The basic point is that at the tantric level, people are divided into particular types. We constantly come across people who are partially or completely one of them. The Buddha family describes a person's intrinsic perspective or stance in perceiving the world and working with it.
But it's a tradition. And because of our traditions.
Oh, sorry. That one's had trouble typing. Basically, he says there, I'll see if we can get it to play. Come on.
But it's a tradition. And because of our traditions. Every one of us knows who he is and what God expects him to do.
So I think if we want to look at each of these has a spirituality. Each of these has an attitude and a philosophy towards life. And they point to differing ways that we find identity and fulfillment. And I think what's really important here and valuable is that this shows us inherent tensions that we see in the real world, interpersonally and culturally. And for me, I also appreciate that there is no single view of morality to be shown here or how people should be. And there are many archetypal systems that will say there is a singular, rigid, uniform path for everyone, which I think is fanciful, not accurate generally, and certainly not Jungian, which believes that everyone has a unique individual path. And this provides us with perhaps some lay of the land of that unique journey. I believe the self is in each of these, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But that there is also an overlap here with the human values circumplex, which is this little chart here. And you can take a screenshot if you're interested in seeing the overlap there. And it's not perfect, but certainly in general, you certainly can see this is a project that was done internationally for many years to understand human values. Certainly a lot of what we're talking about here fits well on top of that map, and it even fits the way it's divided, although there's some imperfections and you can't say it's matching exactly. But there are differences of values here. And I'll show you one more film clip before we start to wrap up.
For no one in this world can you trust. Not men, not women, not beasts. This you
Okay, so this is warrior psychology. I trust power. I trust power, not relationships, not people. That there's both a political viewpoint here, there's a spiritual viewpoint here. There's certainly values that are different from other people's values. And I think that's a very important piece here. So before I wrap up, or as we move towards the end, I just want to talk a bit about some of the questions you might have around maturity. For starters, any psychological type can be any archetype, and I could go into descriptions of what each one looks like, with the different. There are certainly many harder and many easier combinations. I don't think you can make psychological type equal with archetype, and neither did Tony. That's the whole point. Neither did the Guzzies. And MBTI does not match up with Phi Beta family in the way this does. So in the approach that I use, I think you can generally be anywhere on the outside of the circle. We could also look at it as like there's a primary function and a secondary function and a tertiary and an inferior, if you want to use that model. But for me, I think everyone is somewhere on the outside of the circle. You might have one dominant archetype, you might have two. Again, there's two, there's one. And there might be some that are not foremost for you, and that maybe that's something one needs to work on. But I don't think that our libido completely flips to some other place. I don't think Vince Lombardi, who was Father Warrior, at the end of his life, he was working on his inner seeker sage, or that Jung, who I would see as a sage seeker. I don't think he should have evolved into some warrior king in the last phase of his life. I think those ideas are not realistic. So my model is that you grow where you're planted. Understand what's dominant for you, what is in the background. So you can look across the chart. I certainly am a seeker sage myself. I can look across the chart to Father Warrior and say, what can I learn from that? What are the values I should try to integrate? But if I try and build my house there, if I try and say, this is who I am over there, I'm going to be a very unhappy camper. And that's one of the things that people do in looking at this work, is understand that very often they've been living through a set of values that don't represent who they truly are. I'm against the great man theory, which says that you have to integrate all these to be a great man. I think that's fanciful. I just don't see that in the world. I think most great people excel in one or two and have to work on the others. People are generally pretty one-sided. We have the vices of our virtues. Everyone has less fluidity in one of these, I would say, for sure. And of course, but I really, as much saying all that, I do let people, take their own view of this material, and we've all, got to wrestle with these things ourselves. So this is my view of the developmental piece here. But I do not believe there's a uniform pathway of growth, as many other archetypal systems suggest. I believe that is absolutely wrong. I don't believe it. I see the self being in each of these. So mother, father is a spiritual path. This is from Nan Savage Healy, her great book on Tony Wolff. She says, they encourage those under their care to expand into their prime, to find their recognized place within society. They stand as the protector of the family and even of civilization itself. Certainly, sage mediatrix is a spiritual path. Know thyself, as the Delphic Oracle says. The self lives in the sage and mediatrix. Warrior is a spiritual path. Amazon is a spiritual path. Sappho writes, some say an army of horsemen or infantry, a fleet of ships, is the fairest thing on the face of the black earth, but I say it's what one loves. Lover, for me, is a place we find the self. Huxley says the secret of genius is to carry the spirit of the child into old age. The archetypal child is a spiritual path, and guess who agrees with that? But I had to recognize and accept that my soul is a child and that my God in my soul is a child. CGU. From the author of Sword of the Greek, the highest point a man can attain is not knowledge or virtue. Something greater, even more heroic or more despairing, sacred awe. So I think that this offers a helpful model for recognizing and understanding the unconscious structures behind personality and character. I think it helps us understand and discover who we really are, our potential gifts and shadows. And for understanding, discussing, and accepting, and psychologically projecting less onto others who are different from us. And if you want to get into this more with me, I'm going to do a video seminar starting in 10 days. And I'm going to do some Q&A now. We can watch the NASN video at some point if you guys want to. I'm sorry there weren't too many women in the video section, but we can watch NASN if we feel like it. So anyway, that's it for me. Thank you for letting me share that with you. Happy
Amazing.
to do questions. Thank you.
Yeah, wow. Amazing. Yeah. And incredibly convincing, just starting first of all with the alignment of the archetypes between the Buddhist system and Tony Wolff. I mean, just little margin for debate there, I thought, and maybe somebody else will say different, but I thought that alignment was really stunning. I'm curious to know what type of people might be more likely to be the type of people that want to see those integrated versus are more willing to accept, being one or the other. I know, call me narcissist all day, but I'm one of those people that's has a very hard time for letting go of being anything. And I think, so I am an assimilator. I'm a comparativist. It's why I did myth in the first place. I'm curious, if it's not the goal to try and integrate all of them and be the best of all of them, I definitely see, because I get it. You try to do that and you realize, like, in some ways, these archetypes, you're just in a groove. I mean, you're going to be controlling if you're going to be daddy, and it's like, shit. Okay. You wonder about that, but if it's not about integrating all of them, is it possible that we at least need to be able to access all of them sometimes?
Yeah, so I mean, I think psychologically we can talk about a symbolic relationship to each one, that there is some inner, some inner relatedness, some way that we are not, just unconscious completely about other parts of life. So yes. And for me, the biggest part, and I would say this, I mean, most of the people, majority of people, certainly coming into the personal growth space are seeker, sage, in that zone. I mean, it's absolutely, I've done this many, many, many times all over the world. Those are the most common in the personal growth space because they're interested in personal growth. That's the kind of people who are.
Do you think that those people see the father and the parent archetype more angry than nurturing, and that might be part of why they're not engaging the parent archetype as personal growth, as supportive of personal growth?
Yes, obviously. And of course, this gets in the land of parental complexes, which, I mean, as Jungians, it's certainly for the people who are maybe newer to the Jungian world, right? It's so seductive to be like, oh, I'm integrating my anima and I'm doing all this dude, do your parental complexes and then come back and talk to me. Like the basic Jungian work is parental complexes, not all this, beautiful journey. And your first question there, Will, was the uniformity. So I'll be straight up. I just did a presentation recently attacking Robert L. Moore's work. And I think there's serious problems with that model and system. And I mean, I talk to a lot of Jungian analysts. I run Jungian online. Believe me, I don't hear one person saying anything positive about that system. And so it's like a cousin. So, and I'm a kind of carrier of the lineage. So I have to have those fights and I have to go out there and do it. And one of the things that is very typical of the father is wants uniformity. Everyone should have the same thing. You know, it's like gift giving. The father is, you'd associate it with the T in MBTI. Everyone gets treated the same. That's what's fair, right? So there is a strong desire in the father for uniformity. And I think that's partly, I think, you know, if you look at Robert L. Moore or Jordan Peterson, you know, there are father archetype figures, you know, in the greater Jungian world that maybe don't get that that's who they are. And I think certainly Moore, to me, is a classic father, very interested in men's work and very interested in a system that works and is uniform for all men. And I just don't think that's real.
Thank you. And I've got 1,000 follow-up questions, but hopefully we can keep it bouncing around. And by the way, like, I'm both stoked that you took the full time to really go into it, and really glad that we've got 45 minutes still to bounce it around. Does any other panelist have something they want to jump in with right away?
I do. Gary, that was just so marvelous. I couldn't write fast enough. And it's so interesting that you brought up tragedy comedy earlier. So here's a, not a correlation, but just maybe it is a correlation between the genres of literature and types. So I was schooled by a woman by the name of Louise Cowan at the University of Dallas through the PhD. And she had been teaching what she called the genre wheel for 55 years. And it consisted of a very interesting mandala with a lyric at the top. And if you're reading it clockwise, you come around to tragedy, and then you come to comedy, and then you come up the left side to epic. And she saw that each genre, now Aristotle was a big influence on her, but she went really way beyond Aristotle, but he was the root cause of her thinking about types, literary types, generic types. Each one of the genres then consisted of 3 moments. So that, for example, lyric had 3 moments: anticipation, consummation, and then lamentation, a wish for it to be repeated. And tragedy had 3, and comedy and epic. And something you said, and you use Vince Lombardi for an example, and just stay with me, I'll connect these, I hope. Somebody like Vince Lombardi doesn't start off or develop and live out a warrior, and then later in life becomes a seeker. In other words, it's not locked in, but here's what Louise would say about literary genres that's analogous to what you were pointing out. She said, you know, a work of literature is tragic from the get-go. And a work of tragedy never, let's say if it's a play, in the 3rd act begins to flip into the terrain of comedy. No, it remains true to its own generic nature from first to last. So what your presentation has done for me is just spark this whole connection about how can I think about literary genres? How can all of us think about literary genres in terms of what you were presenting? And the other point that Louise made is that all of the genres are included in the genre of epic. So epics contain tragic, comic, and lyric instances or characters, but the epic is never thrown off its game of being an epic. So I don't know, these are just some observations that, for example, then when we read an epic, we're touching base with, I don't know how many different archetypal patterns carried in characters in that epic, in the action. And I think that's one of the great wisdom pieces about reading classics of literature. Not that they're written by a man or a woman, because I think they really are written by androgynous imaginations, but that it allows us to touch base with, and this is a little bit what Will was pointing out, it allows us to feel a resonance of these archetypal patterns and archetypal energies without necessarily being sucked into them, into their vortex. So I'd love for you to respond to that, because I don't have a question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like a longer conversation that I'd really have to like wrap my head around. But I mean, for me, you know, I certainly pay attention to authors and think about different authors being in different places and writing from these different places. You know, I mean, you know, To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf, I think is perhaps, you know, at least describing a mother character, if not written from that point of view. And I think a lot of our authors are very clearly writing from different points of view on this wheel, and that's fine.
Yeah,
that's just fine. And you know, we're probably finding audiences that either identify with it, or that feel like they need that in their lives.
Yes. Thanks, Gary. That was so stimulating. Just terrific.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to dovetail on that to go into film, because I thought your use of film was so fantastic and so illuminating. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. It really brought it home, of course, many of the points that you were making, but also, would you say you could just go through watch almost any film and identify some of these? Would that be, I mean, you know, outside of maybe a cartoon character, but would that be overstating it? Or talk a little bit about your use of film in your work.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes. Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah. So, I mean, I literally, for example, I have taught a course where I turn the model on its to what I call the quadrants. So I've taught a whole course where we just go father, warrior, mother, Amazon in film, documentary, history, figures. So Mother Amazon, the Iron Lady, you know, Margaret Thatcher, you know, like, so, you know, John Wayne, right? So we can go around this chart, and I literally have taught whole courses where I just show film and documentary and television examples of showing you these differences, and they're oppositional. So you see different kinds of people. I think if you look at the most popular film and television of all time, you will find Archetype in, you know, lighting it up, Technicolor Archetype, Archie Bunker. Okay, like there's a reason that show is popular. Family Ties from the 80s, for those of you that go that far back, these shows are built on the tension of archetypal tensions because people live those tensions. So
let me,
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, forgive me. And I know I'm just cherry picking this opportunity to ask you about this. You know, when we teach Archetype at Huston College to filmmakers, actors, storytellers, we're teaching them the archetypal sets as potential casts. Model your whole cast around one of these archetypal sets as one of the experiments that we have them all do. And then, you know, put this line in that character and this line in that character. And I wonder if you see that, if you see casts almost configured around these four sets.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just echoes just what I said. Like if you know, look at the Lord of the Rings, look at Star Wars, look at, you know, all of the most popular film and television of all time. And I mean, The Wizard of Oz, looking for a brain, looking for a heart, looking for courage. And what's Dorothy's primary dilemma? You know, she's that seeking daughter who's in tension with the home. You know, she wants to go on that journey and she feels guilty about it, right? So I think if you look at all the most popular film and television, they just hammer these right home. And also, if you look at certain film genres, I mean, there are whole movies that are just for warriors and that only warriors want to watch, Fast and Furious, et cetera, et cetera. So this stuff is 100% built into the entertainment world, either consciously or unconsciously.
It would be fun to do a follow-up just on this.
That's what I was just about to say.
Yeah, just on film and television.
Yeah.
So I would like to expand the conversation into your use of the term tribes and the social political context that we're living in. Mike Pence calls his wife mother. He never uses her name, he calls her mother. I am so aware of that the mother-father pattern is in my shadow. I didn't have kids. I didn't want to have kids. My psychodynamics are not necessary to go into here, but I'm so aware that that's my least developed archetypal pattern. And I'm wondering if you could talk about, and it was interesting to me that you used tradition with that pattern in Tevye. I love that movie so much, but when I hear tradition, I just want to scream. I want to burn down the walls of tradition. So there's a sense of, I can see myself in all the other three patterns. I can see how my life has unfolded early on as a warrior and always as a seeker and now as a sage. But this one that's in the shadow also seems key. And I get that you don't want to equate it to inferior function and say that it's developmentally necessary. I get that. But what I do think is important is how much projection there is around that missing piece in us. And I think that's a lot of what's happening in the collective now. Do you get that? Can you comment on that?
100%. I mean, I use this model politically to consult.
Oh, okay. Can you explain?
Yeah, I mean, I've done whole presentations on this model and the left and the right. I mean, there's no question that it's very clear, and I don't want to get into the details of it here because I think it'll take us down a whole nother thing, but it's pretty clear you can understand the left and the right through this model very much. And they're 100%. Yeah, I mean, I just thank you, for your work and for what you said there. That there is one that's left out for all of us, and the one that's left out we're going to project onto. So, I mean, we might say if we're a seeker, we're going to project onto mother, father and make them the bad ones. And the opposite is very true.
Right. Right.
Gary, it seems to me that we who are in a position of guiding or being responsible for others bear a certain moral responsibility to those who are dependent upon us. And if we're in school or if we're working for somebody and we have people working with us, they're looking to us for some sense of guidance. And if we're talking about young people, how are they supposed to find or develop that awareness of which of these archetypes or which of these figures they ought to be following? Because often parents push them or influence them, or culture moves them down a particular path. And they can end up to be somewhere further down the path than they want, and they're committed to either a marriage or a career that they can't authenticate themselves, or they believe in this new path, and it's a challenge for them. So how do we get through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think I understand partly what you're saying. Part of what comes up for me with that is that there are people that are looking for an authority figure. Okay, so I don't, I mean, like Connie, I don't, I mean, least connected would be father warrior for me. Just I put it smack dab in the middle between the two. And I'm not really particularly interested in being an authority figure. So, I mean, I'm happy to have a following, I'm happy to be successful, but when people are starting to say this is the gospel, then I get, it's like Life of Brian. I start getting very uncomfortable. So that's not who I am, but boy, are there people that need that and want that.
But
I think if you go ahead.
You are a father,
Uh-huh.
and you have kids,
Mm-hmm.
how do children find their proper outlet? Or for example,
Sure.
these people who stormed the Capitol yesterday, many of them are looking for an outlet. And sadly, the outlet that they found was terrorizing the country.
Sure.
How do people discover an outlet that resonates with their natural authenticity that doesn't take down the culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I can't necessarily answer the second half, but the first half, for example, I mean, I think there's a tremendous thirst amongst young men over the last 20, 30, 40 years for father energy. Certainly as we have more divorces and all that, there's a tremendous number of men that are looking for father energy. And I think that's why Jordan Peterson in particular is as popular as he is. Those are generally his audiences, men that are looking to develop their own or to take in some fatherness. And so he's giving them Jung through a father lens, and they kind of go, oh, that feels good, I need that. And I think many of us as therapists, and I just do a little tiny bit of therapy, not too much, but enough to keep one toe in there. Very often we'll find that we are constellated, or whatever you want to say, we're in a position that we're the exact kind of right character that the client needs. It's not that we're doing something or da-da-da-da, it's just we are a thing they need. They need me as a bit of a rebel or whatever, because they grew up in a really tight, straight, constricted environment. So they need that freedom that I just naturally have. And that's what they're getting through the therapy. And that can go any way around the wheel. So for me, and to talk briefly about parenthood, I mean, just because I'm not father archetypally doesn't mean I can't be a good father or someone can't be a good mother. It's going to be a different kind of mothering, and there's particular shadows to that. Seeker and companion people as parents, when the kids get older, might be a little bit of shadow over involvement in their romantic lives. Watch out. Are you living your romantic life through your daughter mothers? Like, careful, careful, careful. So there'll be a different kind of shadow there, and we can start to identify our own problems. But one of the biggest and most powerful things that I hear from people when I do this work is thank God. Thank God for showing me a model that I don't have to find all my satisfaction and identity and fulfillment out of being mother or father, because that's not who I am. So, and I certainly have people that come into this work and say, yeah, I'm father, mother, straight up. I don't have a problem with that. So anyway, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Connie.
Just a quick add-on, Dana. There's a book that I used a lot when I was doing therapy with young people in their late teens and early 20s called Do Who You Are, which is using type to find career direction. Highly recommended.
I wanted to ask, just while you're on this, the other way around, so if you are father archetype is your nature, because, somebody I knew basically raised, had 4 younger brothers and had all the responsibility in the world, did everything, took care of everything. Being that is just who that person may have been since they were 2 years old. But, then all of a sudden, but being 16, being 18, being 20, and being that father archetype feels like like you should put it on pause, or wait to get there to some extent. Like, be the dang seeker for a minute, or be the warrior at that stage in life. And I totally value what you're saying about the progressions not being linear or objective or something like that. But do you think, is there something to, maybe we come into our nature, or maybe there's some, what do you think about process? How does process come in?
I think all these archetypes are inborn. Like I think, you know, if you see, I mean, I can show you, and in the sessions that I do, I actually show film clips of, like, you know, famous surfers being like, yeah, when I was 6, I was getting swept out to sea, and like, these are born into us. I do not believe how we're raised makes us feel bad about them or good about them, but they're in. And so, I mean, I certainly can know and think of many people I know that are, you know, were mother, father from day one, you know, and that they want to, you know, I mean, if, you know, they want to have the, you know, maybe a tea party.
Do they rebel against themselves when they're 18?
No, they tend to stay collective oriented. That's who they are. Systems matter. Belonging matters. I mean, very common for mother, father to become teachers, to go back into a collective, to live in a collective. They want to be in a group of people. So, you know, I don't, I mean, and you know, I certainly think that, you know, okay, we get to midlife and maybe we're starting to figure some things out, and we think, you know, and I've when I did a talk challenging King Warrior Magician recently, someone said, you know, I'm really proud as a father archetype guy that I, you know, started developing more of my lover and all that. Beautiful. That's great. I'm just saying, let's just be with what is, rather than having an agenda about what we think people should be or anything. And I just don't see it. Like I said, I see mothers and fathers, or every archetype from the beginning. That's generally where people stay. You know, you can talk, I could talk more about, oh, a little movement this way, a little movement that way. But yeah. So, and I know what you mean. Like, if you've been the responsible one in your teen years, maybe in the 20s, it's time to party a little bit. I get it. But my friends and my, you know, companions on this journey in life that are mother and father, you know, tend to be pretty responsible and society oriented the whole time.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the presentation. I was wondering that we have, as far as the identifying individually with the archetypes, is it's our own thing and we feel comfortable with it. But if we expand that to a cultural level, I know we have sensitivities to cultural stereotypes and all that. Is it possible that certain types, whether it's the Patna or the Ratna or the Karma or the other ones, are more, let's see if I can put this correctly, culturally more acceptable or more popular if we kind of overlap the individual level with the cultural setting? Certainly we identify certain cultures as warrior cultures, where one particular type might be more popular. And for people who are kind of have one foot in each culture, like I myself, sometimes when I go to my older culture, I know that I have to, you know, do certain code switching to see what is popular there, and to avoid saying things that I would normally be saying here in the United States. So I don't know. Does that make sense? Can we?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. That's a brilliant question. And I would say there are so many ways that that's true. I mean, I have friends who have done this work with me for years. And a great example from one of them, you know, she was talking to a friend in the supermarket, and she realized she had to change archetypes in the conversation in order to connect in that conversation. So you can, understanding this stuff, you can find, oh, I need to language this differently. Seeker companions very often don't even understand that there are spaces and places you walk into that are very, very heavily full of taboos, full of think you're supposed to do this, you're not supposed to do that, very mother, father, Ratna spaces that are strongly defined with you do this, you don't do that. And, you know, as a seeker companion, I'm very often just like, oh, you know, the fool card, you know, just like, whoa, you know, oblivious to all that, right? And there are people that live in that. That's all they care about is the totem pole. And oh, you broke that. Oh, back to square zero. You broke the taboo. So there's the interpersonal and then there's countries, cultures, groups. Now I could say, okay, America generally X and Y, these archetypes. But if you go to, San Francisco versus Dallas, versus, different parts, is there different archetypal emphasis. And I think people sort themselves archetypally.
Aren't these taken advantage of in international relations through these cultural stereotyping? Like, remember, I think it was right after 9/11, when France was a bit hesitant joining the coalition of the willing against the bombing of Afghanistan and whatever. And it went on for a while. Is that just because France was not willing to be more assertive, more warrior? Therefore, I think the French companies were barred from bidding in the war. I think it was in Iraq, when they were trying to see which oil companies would participate in bidding and trying to take over and all that. So aren't certain cultures taken advantage of in that sense?
Yeah, I think there are certainly many countries that are far more warrior. And I think certainly, the US is extremely warrior. I'm Canadian, but I've spent a lot of time and a lot of love, and a lot of people I'm closest to are American. But, to me, when I look at America, I see an extremely warrior culture, top to bottom. I mean, who cares about high school sports? Why are there stadiums for high school sports? I mean, it's a deeply, deeply warrior culture. And, another country that didn't go along with the Iraq War was Canada. And I certainly think there are, like, you can think of Europe as being perhaps in general more seeker companion-y, than the States. There are certainly, Russia and the UK are both also sort of father warrior, like the US.
Gary, that was just a fascinating presentation. I just loved it. But, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, as a therapist and a clinician, you rocked my world in a certain way. And I'm thinking, yes, I really agree with you that people are born a certain way. Absolutely. But sometimes the level of dysfunction is so bad that they don't even know where they're going to fit. And that's kind of, in the world that I work in. So if you could speak to how clinically, how you would look at some of this with, the heavier type of pathology rather than people who are more self-actualized, because it's a different feel.
And if I can, I just want to add a twist from Peg Burge to what you said. I think it's the same thing, and maybe we can sneak in one extra piece. Who asked, can one's personal complex keep a person from identifying with the archetype they inherently have in them? And I think that's kind of part of the direction you're going. Is that right, Selena?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I'll take a shot at it. I'm not exactly sure if I'm going to answer the question that you're presenting, so let me know if I don't answer it exactly right. Like, first of all, I do not see any kind of like association between pathologies and archetype. I mean, we could have a deeper conversation and get into some really specific things, and perhaps maybe even privately, I'd be more willing to talk about some of that. But in general, I don't boil down any complex and say this is that archetypal thing in the most general terms. I certainly believe there are many people that have been wounded in a certain way that would prevent them from identifying with their own archetypes. But in general, I just also think there's cultural conditioning, family conditioning, and even, like I said, in the personal growth world, the normative thing to do is to be the seeker companion or seeker companion sage mediatrix. That's the normative thing. And I certainly have had people in my work that I felt like maybe they were a little bit more mother-father that really could not come around to seeing that. And that's just my take on it. Their own, you have to ask them, obviously, what's true. But I think there are ways that even we sort of unconsciously normalize certain things. So, I think there's all kinds of blocks that are sometimes unconscious. And like I said, I see some people that like right away, for me, I mean, obviously Seeker Sage, I was so lit up the first time that I saw this material. Like I knew this is what I wanted to talk about for the rest of my life. So, and it's held true for 25 years. So, there's many, many different ways. And I think it's just, I think it's really important. And I hope I've gained some wisdom, doing workshops for, at least 10 years, probably 15 on this stuff. And I'm not super dogmatic. I actually won't dialogue and say, people will say, well, what archetype do you think I am? I don't do that anymore. I think each person really has to just go with their own process. And, you might at one point think, okay, I'm over here. And then over time, very commonly, people will come back to me and go, oh, I thought I was over here. And now 6 months or a year or 2 years later, I think I'm really here. And so am I answering your question at all?
Yeah. So what you're saying is that when people have a lot more dysfunction, it's harder to find where they authentically are, but that the goal would be to find their authenticity and the place that they were planted. And sometimes it's harder to find that. It takes the time, is what I'm hearing you say. That's probably dead on.
Yeah, it may be, or it may not be. Like trauma might block us, or it might not.
Well, don't you think, Selena, that there are levels of development within each of these archetypes, just like there are in the types? You can be a very high functioning intuitive and a very low functioning intuitive. So it would seem to me you could be a high functioning mother, father, and a low functioning. So some of it is like the gradations of development within the archetypal pattern.
Cool, right. Okay.
Yeah, I certainly believe that. And I certainly know many very mature, high functioning father archetype and mother archetype folks who look very different from, as you might say, lower functioning, or in any archetype, right? At any level of lower development, the archetype will look cartoony.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. You did answer.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Oh, hello, Gary.
Hi.
I really appreciate the presentation. It gave me quite a bit of food for thought. So it was very challenging, and I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm pretty much down with what you're talking about. However, what I want you to explore a little more is a notion of being born a particular way, right? Because you've done this wonderful job of linking aesthetics to psychology or the personality. And again, I love that. But to be born with it reeks of a kind of biological ism that many people resist. And then and notice I'm on your team. So I'm actually asking you these questions so you can explain it, right? And then aesthetically, it seems to be drawing up on a very Aristotelian notion of ideal forms. And I know that's not what you're arguing. So could you explain more to me and the audience what you mean by being born with?
Yeah, I think that there's a character structure that we're simply born into. I mean, some children are come out and they're warriors and they're kinetic and they're scrambling around, and some kids are reflective and held back and sagacious. And nobody, this is in the same family, right? In the exact same environment, you can have a warrior kid and a sage kid, and all these different combinations. So I personally, and I understand what you mean, because there is sort of the edge of a cultural conflict or discussion that's poked at here. And I think it's a cultural conflict that the Jungian world has not really had, but is there, that is, like you know, like, I mean, I do not believe that. I'm not a postmodernist. I don't believe that the world is, everything in the world is conditioned by society, which is what my understanding the postmodernists believe. So, and the Jungians don't believe that. I mean, we believe in the unconscious, and that is fundamentally at odds with postmodernism. Fundamentally rejects a lot of that. So there is a big argument there about essentialism and different things. And Boris, I love your question. Be happy to maybe have a conversation on email. I don't think I can give you what you're looking for right now, but I would say in general, I get that there is a conflict there, that we're on a fault line of different viewpoints. And I think there is a lot of merit in having that conversation. I think it's a very hot conversation, a very dangerous conversation. And there's a lot of, you know, there's the cancel culture thing, and there's a lot of tension and energy that could come to a head in a conversation like that. But the Jungian point of view is not a postmodernist point of view. And so I'm on that team, and I don't believe, you know, in the postmodernist stuff. And so anyway.
No, I know, I appreciate the answer. I don't think it's necessarily postmodernism or deconstruction. I think, you know, this goes all the way back to nature versus nurture. And of course, you have people who do DNA work, and they would argue with you, right, that indeed there is some biological relevancy. Not everything is social. So what I'm taking from what you're saying then is you're arguing that there is a predisposition, right? That makes certain behaviors or certain archetypes more likely than others. Right? And the person, Irene Rockwell, because I was preparing for your work, she mentioned it too, talked about energy, and you've talked about energy. So certain energies predispose. Is that, could I say that? Is that an accurate representation?
Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And I do think that nurture does matter. And I think we could have a whole other conversation. Like, you know, for me, although I'm a seeker warrior, I grew up around a father warrior, mother Amazon, really. I had a grandmother who was Mother Amazon, very big business figure in the town that I was in, who was the matriarch of our family. So because I grew up around a strongly Mother Amazon energy and around business, I'm very comfortable in those spaces. I can walk into a boardroom and feel, okay, I worked in business from a very young age. And so, you know, the nurture bit made me capable of moving in those different spaces, but it didn't make me who I am. So
thank you, very much appreciate it.
You're welcome. Appreciate the conversation.
I just wanted to ask, Selena, were you going to ask something first?
No. Good. I'm good. I'm just forgot.
Cool. I was just going to ask, you know, I would love to hear I know you have an event where you're going to do some more deep dive into this stuff. And I would just love to hear you say, you know, talk a little bit more about where you go when you have more time with this stuff. And you know, I think, you know, what people who might sign up might expect.
Oh, thank you. So, you know, I've done this many different ways. I've done like weekend workshops where we go over this. What I'm doing in this time, and I'm actually going to be writing a book on this exact stuff during this time. So I'm you know, sort of selfishly enjoying the course that's coming up as a way to keep me energized for that. But what's going to happen with that course, 9 weeks, Sundays, we're going to have the discussions at 4 p.m. Pacific. Archetypalnature.com is where people register. The lesson part is pre-recorded videos that focus on the archetype end. So there you really get you get, you know, an hour or 90 minutes on every one of these archetypes of me just delivering what I just did, but more. So more videos, more film, more, you know, everything I pulled is it's in there, right? So we'll do, you know, the first is an intro week, and then mother, father, warrior, we talk about the oppositions. Guess what? People tend to be attracted to the opposite. If you're hetero, the opposite gender.
The relationships between these archetypes was one of the things I was wondering if
Sure.
Great.
Sure. We tend to be attracted to, again, if we're hetero, we tend to be attracted to the opposite and the opposite gender and dislike same gender, opposite archetype people. So, we can talk about the oppositions, we can talk about families, we can talk about children, relationship, very different mating dances. If you don't know the Amazon mating dance, Forrest knows what I'm talking about. So Amazons want a little push. They're gonna text you and give you. They're not gonna be nice. They're gonna give you. They want. Oh yeah, I'll take you. They want that competition in their mating dance. So this is very different types of people with different ways of being. So we get into that. So the videos are just there. You join the class, all the videos, I open them up for you, but the weekly meetings have a specific, watch this video for this week and this video for that week, specific theme we'll get into. And those videos are archetypal. So I'll be bringing the 5 Buddha family stuff into the discussion because the videos are strictly sort of my collection of everything that I've got on, from the archetypal point of view, and then I'll bring the 5 Buddha families into the discussion. And, that's how that's going to go. And, there is a sort of a 2.0 that I mentioned. I like to also later on in the year, I may do it again, where I look, just like I said, I'll just do Father Warrior, Mother Amazon. What is that? And we'll just do a whole, 2 hours on that, and then the next, and then the next. So that's for a later offering. But for this, you just get the basics, which I think is what we're talking about here.
Gary, I've got one more little red herring to throw in here.
Okay.
Have you ever incorporated any perspectives on sibling birth order?
It's funny, I was thinking about that today. So there certainly is a stereotypical kind of like, you might think firstborn more likely to be father, mother, right? So there's a stereotypical associations there, yeah.
Well, and there are assumptions that if you are a firstborn, and I am, and Will, aren't you firstborn? I mean, there's just, and Connie, and Selena.
Me too.
And Voris. I mean, and you, I mean, are these coincidences? But there are assumptions that firstborns have about reality. It's just you assume that things are going to be a certain way, that you step off the curb and the ground will rise up to meet you and things like that. And I just compare that with other siblings that I have, and I grew up in a family of 5. There was a guy named Sulloway who wrote a book called Born to Rebel. But I just think it plays into this, that even if we are inhabited with some archetype that awakens our authenticity, how we happen to fit into that communal family matrix that we were born into plays out and gives us an awful lot of bearing on who it is that we might ultimately evolve into as a person.
Yeah, I don't make any direct associations between birth order and archetype, but I think there are stereotypical assumptions about it. But one of the things that like I said, I mean, I'm trying to peel this work out from sort of being overlapped by there are Jungians who've written, books and mentioned quickly and just do like a very short look at this stuff. And they'll say, oh, warrior's just sensation. Well, that's great up until you meet an intuitive warrior. And then you're like, okay, well, that's not right. And, if you go into any corporate boardroom, it's going to be Mother Amazon, Father Warrior, ENTJs. And you'll notice the N, this is the most common executive type, ENTJ. But boy, a lot of those folks are going to be warriors.
Not ESTJ.
And not in the my understanding of the classic executive type is ENTJ. That's how I learned, but maybe I'm out of date. I don't know.
What you bring up is that we might have material that would be mutually beneficial to talk to you about, maybe coming back for a part 2, maybe late fall or
Sure,
summertime sometime.
Sure.
Maybe when that book's ready.
You know, you resonate with an awful lot of the people. The chat box has been really active. You have excited things in me and everybody else. And so let's keep the talk alive. I really, Gary, I thank you. When I reached out to you after seeing you at the Mastery Circle, I said, this guy's hot. He's got substance, he's got personality, and you brought yourself in here and shared wonderfully. And I'm just
Thank you.
really,
Thank you.
as is our custom, our tradition, if you will, I like to go out in a kind of a somber sort of way. I like to ring the singing bowl again. And, we're continuing. I don't want to lose our grounding and think of this as a privileged, esoteric salon where we're not grounded in the real world. But in the course of the couple hours, we just lost a few hundred more people. And that to me is just an absolute tragedy. But I don't want us to lose sight of that. So with all of the people, I just would like us to go out with a moment of silence, think about who is meaningful and sacred in your lives. Thank you. Gary, you have been exceedingly generous with yourself, with your knowledge, with your wisdom. You have so much to offer. And on behalf of everybody here, I'm just deeply grateful. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you, everybody, for coming in.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Connie, Dennis, Forrest,
Thank you.
Selena.
What a pleasure. What a pleasure.
What a great evening.
Thank you.
Night.
Another home run.
Yeah.
No? All right.
Good night, all.
Good night, all.
Oof.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you. My goodness. Thank you, guys. That's just
Well,
heavy experience.
I
Yeah.
really enjoyed it. And I'll have a video up in a couple of days. I got all your stuff here and this is great.